A millionaire abandoned his wife, who loved him, for a young virgin. But when the woman he underestimated left without looking back, his obsession with revenge led him into a dangerous game. The millionaire, seeking revenge, watched his empire crumble before his eyes. This incredible story has a thrilling ending. Watch this and many other stories. Manhattan's skyline cut through the evening like a jagged crown, and from the 78th floor of Pierce Tower, Maxwell Pierce observed his kingdom. The city lights sparkled below, each one a testament to power and possibility. At 58, Maxwell had built his real estate empire with the same precision a chess master uses to claim the board. Calculated, ruthless, and without sentiment. "The Richardson deal is signed," announced Eliza, his executive assistant, placing a folder on his sleek mahogany desk. They accepted all terms. Maxwell didn't look away from the view. They always do, eventually. His office, minimalist, expensive, intimidating, was designed exactly like the man himself. Nothing was placed without purpose. Nothing existed without his approval. Crystal decanters filled with amber liquor caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating prisms on the white walls. Awards and accolades lined custom shelves, each one a milestone in his ascent from middle-class Connecticut to Manhattan's elite. "Rebecca called again," Eliza added hesitantly. "She asked if you'd reconsider attending the charity gala tomorrow night." At the mention of his wife's name, Maxwell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell her I have the Beijing investors in town. Business first, always." For 15 years, Rebecca Pierce had played her role perfectly. The elegant, supportive wife of one of New York's most powerful real estate moguls. She hosted the right parties, wore the right designers, supported the right causes. To the outside world, they were Manhattan royalty. But Maxwell hadn't married for love. He'd married because a man of his stature required a wife. Beautiful, educated, and from a respectable family, Rebecca had been another perfect acquisition. Later that evening, Maxwell arrived at his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The space was immaculate, designed by New York's most sought-after interior decorator, another of Rebecca's projects that he'd funded but never really noticed. The sound of soft classical music drifted through the apartment. "You're home early," Rebecca said, appearing in the doorway of the living room. At 46, she remained striking, tall and graceful, with honey blonde hair and intelligent green eyes that had once captivated Manhattan's social scene. She wore a simple black dress, pearls at her throat, a glass of wine in her hand. "The Thompson meeting ended sooner than expected," Maxwell replied absently, pouring himself a whiskey. "I need to review the contracts for tomorrow." Rebecca watched. Him, a familiar tension building between them. "I spoke with Sarah today," she said, referring to their daughter who was studying at Yale. "She asked about Thanksgiving. I told her we'd both be there this year." Maxwell didn't respond. His phone buzzed, and he checked it immediately, dismissing Rebecca's words without acknowledgement. "Max," she said, her voice firmer now, "you missed last Thanksgiving, and Christmas, and her birthday. She's your daughter." "She understands." "That my work?" "No," Rebecca interrupted, surprising them both. "She doesn't understand. Neither do I anymore." Maxwell looked up, genuinely startled by her tone. In 15 years, Rebecca had never challenged him this way. "I have a conference. Call with Tokyo in an hour," he said, his voice cold. "Can we discuss this another time?" Rebecca set her wineglass down with deliberate care. "There won't be another time, Max. There never is." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "The gala tomorrow night is for Sarah's Scholarship Foundation. If you respected either of us, you'd be there." Maxwell watched her go, irritation flaring. Rebecca had always been reasonable, understanding the sacrifices necessary for success. This new defiance was inconvenient. The next morning, Maxwell woke alone, as usual. Rebecca had long ago moved to the guest bedroom, a change he'd barely noticed until it became permanent. He went through his morning routine with military precision, a 5-mile run on the treadmill, protein shake, shower, custom suit selected the night before. When he entered the kitchen, Rebecca sat at the breakfast bar, newspaper open, coffee. Untouched. "I'll be late tonight," Maxwell announced, checking his watch. "Don't wait up." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes unnervingly clear. "I've waited for 15 years, Max. I won't be waiting anymore." Something in her tone made him pause. He studied her face, noticing for the first time the quiet resolve there. "What does that mean?" She held his gaze steadily. "It means I'm leaving you." Maxwell stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then he laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. We have the Wilson dinner next week, and the Hampton fundraiser after that." "I won't be attending," she said, simply. "I've already packed. The papers will be delivered to your office this afternoon." For the first time in years, Maxwell really looked at his wife. The beautiful accessory he'd chosen so carefully now seemed like a stranger. "This is absurd," he said, his voice hardening. "Whatever issue you're having, we can discuss it tonight." Rebecca shook her head. "There's nothing to discuss. I should have done this years ago. I just kept hoping you'd eventually see me, really see me. But I was never more than another acquisition to you." "You're being ridiculous," Maxwell snapped, genuine anger rising. "After everything I've given you." "You've given me things, Max. Houses, jewelry, status. But you've never given me you. Not once in 15 years. She stood, smoothing her skirt with steady hands. "I deserve more than being a footnote in Maxwell Pierce's biography." The situation was slipping out of his control, and Maxwell felt a surge of cold fury. No one left Maxwell Pierce, especially not his perfectly selected wife, who'd benefited from his success for 15 years. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to maintain your current lifestyle," he warned. "The prenup is very clear." Rebecca smiled then, a sad expression that somehow made him uncomfortable. "I never cared about the money, Max. That was always your assumption, not mine." Her calm certainty infuriated him more than tears or shouting would have. This wasn't how their relationship worked. Rebecca was supposed to be grateful, accommodating, permanently available. "You'll regret this," he said coldly. "When you're living in some cramped apartment, wearing off-the-rack clothes, you'll remember what you threw away." Rebecca picked up her purse, a simple Hermes bag he'd given her for their anniversary, one of many expensive gifts he'd selected with his assistant's help. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I did love you once. Before I realized I was just another trophy in your collection." The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, and Maxwell stood alone in his perfect penthouse, surrounded by all the symbols of his success. For the first time in his immaculate life, something had happened that he hadn't authorized or controlled. Rebecca had left him. The realization didn't hurt. Maxwell didn't allow emotions to interfere with his life, but it was unprecedented, unacceptable. No one walked away from Maxwell Pierce. He made the decisions. He determined the endings. His phone rang, his assistant reminding him of his 9 a.m. meeting with the board. Maxwell straightened his tie, pushed aside the uncomfortable encounter, and headed for the elevator. By the time he reached the lobby, his focus had returned to business. Rebecca's departure was simply another problem to solve, another situation to control. And control was what Maxwell Pierce did best. What he couldn't possibly know as he stepped into his waiting town car was that Rebecca's departure was merely the first domino to fall in the carefully arranged collapse of everything he had built. 3 months after Rebecca's departure, Maxwell Pierce stood in his office surveying his domain. The divorce proceedings had been swift and clinical, exactly as he'd instructed his lawyers to handle it. Rebecca had asked for surprisingly little, just the house in Connecticut and a reasonable settlement that barely dented his fortune. The ease of her departure bothered him more than he cared to admit. She'd vanished from the social circuit completely. No charity galas, no luncheons, no appearances at the high-profile events where Manhattan's elite gathered to see and be seen. It was as if she'd simply evaporated, taking with her 15 years of shared history. "Mr. Donovan is here for your 2 o'clock, announced Eliza through the intercom. "Send him in," Maxwell replied, turning from the window. James Donovan, Maxwell's PR director, entered with his usual energetic stride, tablet in hand. At 35, Donovan represented a new generation of business, tech-savvy, image-conscious, and ruthlessly efficient. The Richardson Tower press coverage is excellent, Donovan began without preamble. Forbes is interested in a profile piece, and the Journal wants an exclusive on the Chicago expansion. Maxwell nodded absently. Schedule whatever you think best. Donovan hesitated, then added carefully, There's been some chatter about your personal situation. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. Meaning? The divorce. People are talking. Investors don't like instability, and your image has always been built on perfect control. Donovan scrolled through his tablet. The Astor Foundation Gala is next month. It would be advantageous if you weren't attending alone. Find me someone suitable, Maxwell said dismissively. Donovan cleared his throat. Actually, I took the liberty of arranging some introductions. Society women, models, actresses, all appropriate companions who understand discretion. 2 weeks later, Maxwell attended a private art auction at Sotheby's with Victoria Hayes, a 28-year-old gallery curator with impeccable credentials, Stanford education, family connections to old New England money, and striking beauty that complemented his silver fox image perfectly. Victoria was everything Rebecca wasn't. Young, eager to please, impressed by his wealth and power. She listened attentively when he spoke, laughed at his rare attempts at humor, and deferred to his opinions on everything from art to politics. Maxwell found her admiration intoxicating after Rebecca's growing indifference over the years. Within a month, Victoria had become a fixture at his side. The press took notice immediately, speculating about the beautiful young woman who had captured Maxwell Pierce's attention so soon after his divorce. Photos of them at restaurants, events, and entering his building circulated widely. The coverage. Here's excellent, Donovan reported, showing Maxwell the latest society page featuring a photo of him and Victoria at the opera. The narrative is shifting from abandoned husband to man-embracing new chapter. Investors are responding positively. Maxwell examined the photo. Victoria looked radiant in a midnight blue gown, her dark hair cascading over one shoulder, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They made a striking couple, the powerful silver-haired mogul and his beautiful young companion. The contrast with his previous life was exactly what he wanted. What about Rebecca? Maxwell asked, trying to sound casual. Any mention of her? Donovan shook his head. She's completely off the radar, living quietly in Connecticut, from what I gather. The news should have satisfied him, but Maxwell felt an unexpected flicker of irritation. Rebecca should be witnessing his triumphant recovery, his seamless transition to a more attractive, more appreciative partner. Make sure Victoria is featured prominently in the Vanity Fair piece, he instructed. I want her background emphasized, her education, her family connections. 6 months after Rebecca walked out of his penthouse, Maxwell proposed to Victoria during a weekend in the Hamptons. The ring, an 8-carat diamond that dwarfed Rebecca's modest 3-carat, was selected with careful attention to how it would photograph. The proposal was orchestrated with the precision of a business merger, private dinner on the beach, photographer discreetly capturing the moment, press release prepared in advance. Victoria's joyful acceptance made headlines exactly as planned. Real estate mogul finds new love, declared the New York Post. Maxwell Pierce to wed art world beauty, announced Town & Country. Social media exploded with the news, and congratulations poured in from business associates and social connections alike. The timing couldn't have been better. Maxwell's business was expanding. New developments in Chicago, San Francisco, and London. His personal renaissance perfectly complemented his professional ascendance. The narrative was complete. Maxwell Pierce had emerged from his divorce stronger than ever, with a younger, more beautiful fiancée and an expanding empire. The engagement party at the Rainbow Room was the social event of the season. New York's elite gathered to celebrate, and Victoria shone at Maxwell's side, wearing a custom Valentino gown and the enormous diamond that had already become infamous in social circles. "Congratulations, Max," said Richard Townsend, his oldest business associate, clapping him on the shoulder. "She's stunning. You've certainly upgraded." Maxwell smiled thinly, accepting the backhanded compliment with practiced grace. Victoria understands what it means to be with a man in my position, he replied, watching as his fiancée charmed a group of investors across the room. Well, you've bounced back spectacularly, Richard continued. Must have been quite a shock. When Rebecca left, none of us saw that coming. Maxwell's smile hardened. Life moves forward, Richard. So do I. Later that evening, as they returned to the penthouse, Victoria slipped off her heels and curled up on the white leather sofa, the same sofa where Rebecca had sat so many times, always with a book or portfolio. Have charity work, never fully relaxed. Everyone loved the party, Victoria said, admiring her ring in the dim light. The Carltons have invited us to their place in Aspen next month. Maxwell poured himself a scotch. I'll have to check my schedule. Victoria's smile dimmed slightly. I told them we'd love to come. It's an important connection, Max. Senator Carlton could be useful for the zoning issues in Chicago. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, surprised by her strategic thinking. You're right. We'll go. Victoria's smile returned, brilliant and calculated. I know how these things work, Max. My father taught me well. She rose gracefully and approached him, sliding her arms around his neck. I'm not just here to look pretty on your arm. I understand the game. Something in her words triggered a memory. Rebecca, years ago, offering advice on a difficult negotiation, her insight proving unexpectedly valuable. Maxwell had dismissed her input then, assuming her intelligence was limited to social arrangements and charity functions. He pushed the thought away. Victoria was different, younger, more malleable, more aligned with his vision for his life. The wedding was scheduled for spring at the Plaza Hotel, a lavish affair designed to showcase Maxwell's power and Victoria's beauty. Every detail was meticulously planned, from the guest list of 500 elite attendees to the custom-designed table settings. The final guest list needs your approval, Eliza said one morning, placing a folder on his desk. And Ms. Victoria has requested a meeting about the honeymoon options. Maxwell barely glanced at the folder. Tell her whatever she wants is fine. Eliza hesitated. There's been a call from Sarah, your daughter. She's asking if she should expect an invitation to the wedding. Maxwell looked up sharply. His relationship with Sarah had become strained after the divorce. She'd sided with Rebecca, of course, always closer to her mother than to him. Addie. Her to the list, he said curtly. First row, family section. That evening, Victoria discussed wedding details over dinner, her enthusiasm for the extravagant plans evident in her animated gestures. The flowers alone will be extraordinary. 10,000 white roses imported from Ecuador. And the cake. 7 tiers, each representing a different phase of our love story. She paused, noticing Maxwell's distraction. Is everything all right? Maxwell set down his wineglass. My daughter may attend the wedding. Victoria's perfect smile faltered momentarily. Sarah, that's wonderful. I'd love to finally meet her. Something in her tone didn't ring true, but Maxwell dismissed the observation. She's been away at school, busy with her own life. Of course, Victoria said smoothly. Family is so important. I can't wait to be part of yours. Later that night, as Victoria slept beside him, Maxwell found himself staring at the ceiling, an unfamiliar restlessness keeping him awake. The wedding plans, the business expansions, the carefully constructed narrative of his triumphant recovery, everything was proceeding exactly as designed. Yet something felt off, a discord in the perfect symphony he'd orchestrated. A text message from earlier in the day haunted him, a simple notification that Rebecca had finally changed her last name back to Stewart. The news shouldn't have affected him, but it did, like a small stone in an expensive shoe. He told himself it was merely pride. After all, the Pierce name was valuable, representing power and success. Rebecca's rejection of it was just another small rebellion, another way of erasing the years they'd spent together. What Maxwell couldn't admit, even to himself, was that Rebecca's complete disappearance from his life had left a void that Victoria's youth and beauty couldn't quite fill. His revenge, replacing Rebecca with someone younger and more beautiful, felt hollow without Rebecca there to witness it. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Maxwell finally drifted into uneasy sleep, unaware that the empire he'd built with such precision was already beginning to crack at its foundation. The morning after the engagement announcement appeared in the New York Times, Maxwell sat in his office reviewing the quarterly reports when Eliza entered with an unusual expression, a mixture of concern and hesitation that immediately put him on alert. "What is it?" he asked, setting aside the financial projections. "There's something you should see." She placed her tablet in front of him, open to page 6 of the Post. The headline made his blood run cold. "Pierce's Princess. Who is Victoria Hayes really?" The article wasn't just a casual society piece, it was a calculated attack. It questioned Victoria's background, suggesting her Stanford degree was exaggerated and her family's New England connections were tenuous at best. There were grainy photos of a younger Victoria at nightclubs with questionable companions, and vague references to previous relationships with wealthy men. "Get Donovan here, now," Maxwell ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. When the PR director arrived, sweating slightly in his tailored suit, Maxwell was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Explain," he said simply, gesturing to the tablet. Donovan cleared his throat. "It appears someone has been digging into Victoria's past. We're already working on a counter-narrative, emphasizing her professional accomplishments and philanthropic interests." "Who's behind this?" Maxwell demanded. "We're not sure yet. The article mentions sources close to the couple, but doesn't name anyone specific." Maxwell turned, his expression glacial. "Find out and make this disappear." By midday, the damage control was in full swing. Victoria appeared on a friendly morning show, laughing off the ridiculous rumors with practiced charm. Donovan arranged for several of Maxwell's high-profile friends to publicly defend the couple. The article was dismissed as jealous gossip, the work of rivals trying to tarnish Maxwell's perfect comeback. For a moment, it seemed the crisis had been averted. But 2 days later, another blow came, this time from an unexpected direction. "Mr. Pierce," Eliza said tentatively, "Mr. Hoffman from the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. He's asking about Victoria's connection to the Gardner family." The name sent a jolt through Maxwell's system. Charles Gardner was one of his biggest rivals in New York real estate, a man he'd outmaneuvered and humiliated in a particularly vicious bidding war 3 years earlier. "Put him through," Maxwell said, his mind racing. "Mr. Pierce," the journalist began without preamble, "we're running a story tomorrow about your fiancé's previous relationship with Justin Gardner, Charles Gardner's son. Care to comment?" Maxwell's grip on the phone tightened. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "According to our sources, Ms. Hayes and Justin Gardner were involved for nearly 2 years, ending just before she met you. Interesting coincidence, don't you think?" After ending the call with a terse no comment, Maxwell summoned Victoria to his office. She arrived an hour later, looking immaculate in a cream Chanel suit, her expression carefully neutral. "You never mentioned knowing Justin Gardner," Maxwell said as soon as the door closed behind her. Victoria's composure didn't falter. "It wasn't relevant. I've had relationships before you, Max, just as you had a marriage before me." "Gardner is my competitor's son," Maxwell said, his voice dangerously low. "That makes it relevant." "It was a brief thing years ago," Victoria replied with a dismissive wave. "I barely remember it now. The journal says it was a 2-year relationship that ended right before we met. A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Victoria's perfect features before she recovered. Journalists exaggerate. Does it really matter now? I chose you, not him." The explanation should have satisfied him, but something felt off. Victoria's calm seemed too practiced, her dismissal too convenient. "No more surprises," Maxwell warned. "I won't have my reputation compromised." Victoria approached his desk, her movements deliberately graceful. "Max, darling, I understand your concern, but focus on what matters. We're building something beautiful together. Don't let petty gossip distract you." She kissed him lightly, her perfume enveloping him in a familiar cloud of expensive notes. I have nothing to hide. I'm an open book. The Gardner revelation dominated the business news cycle for 48 hours before being eclipsed by a major merger announcement from a tech giant. Maxwell's PR team had managed the situation effectively, portraying Victoria as an innocent, caught between feuding business titans. The wedding plans continued uninterrupted, with Victoria throwing herself into the arrangements with renewed enthusiasm. But the incident had planted a seed of doubt in Maxwell's mind, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to and didn't welcome. For the first time, he found himself watching Victoria when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the careful calculation behind her spontaneous seeming gestures, the way her phone was always angled away from his line of sight. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala, Maxwell received a text from an unknown number. Ask your fiancé about March 15th last year, Central Park South apartment. Maxwell stared at the message, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The date was familiar. It was around the time he'd first met Victoria at the Sotheby's auction. Ready to go? Victoria appeared in the doorway, resplendent in an emerald gown that highlighted her flawless figure. Maxwell tucked the phone into his pocket. "You look beautiful," he said, forcing a smile. Throughout the gala, the mysterious text message nagged at him. Victoria performed her role perfectly, charming the right people, making connections that would benefit his business, presenting the image of devoted fiancé. Yet Maxwell found himself studying her with new eyes, noticing the practiced nature of her laugh, the strategic placement of her hand on his arm whenever photographers were present. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, Maxwell instructed his driver to take him to Central Park South. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the address in the text message had been specific enough to warrant investigation. The building was one of Manhattan's premier residential towers, a competitor's property, ironically. The doorman recognized him immediately. "Mr. Pierce, what an unexpected pleasure. How may I assist you?" Maxwell hesitated, then decided on directness. "I'm looking for information about an apartment that may have been rented here last March. It would have been a short-term arrangement." The doorman's friendly expression faltered. "I'm afraid I can't." Maxwell withdrew his wallet and removed several $100 bills. "Perhaps this might help your memory." 20 minutes and $1,000 later, Maxwell had his answer. Apartment 34B had indeed been rented for 6 months, starting in January of the previous year. The tenant's name wasn't Victoria Hayes, but the doorman's description matched her perfectly. More disturbing was his casual mention that the lady had frequent visitors, including Mr. Gardner's son. The revelation shouldn't have surprised him after the news article, but confirmation of Victoria's connection to the Gardner family felt like a physical blow. Maxwell returned to his car, his mind churning with suspicion. Back at his office, he instructed Eliza to clear his afternoon schedule and summoned his head of security, a former FBI agent named Daniel Sullivan. "I need background on Victoria." "Hayes," Maxwell said without preamble, "comprehensive, discreet, and immediately." Sullivan nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "How deep do you want me to go?" "All the way. Every relationship, every job, every address for the past 10 years, and I want to know about her current activities, phone records, emails, whereabouts when she's not with me." "That's extensive surveillance, sir. Potentially illegal in some aspects." Maxwell fixed him with a cold stare. "Find a way. I pay you to solve problems, not create obstacles." 3 days later, Sullivan returned with a thick folder. "You should review this privately," he advised, placing it on Maxwell's desk. Alone. In his office, Maxwell opened the file and began reading. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Victoria Hayes wasn't who she claimed to be. Her Stanford degree was real, but she'd been suspended in her final year for academic misconduct. Her family's New England heritage was mostly fabrication. Her father was a mid-level insurance executive from Pennsylvania, not the banking scion she'd described. More disturbing were her connections. Her relationship with Justin Gardner hadn't been brief or years ago. Phone records showed regular contact, as recently as 2 months earlier. There were unexplained cash deposits to her account, meetings in out-of-the-way locations, and suspicious gaps in her daily schedule that she'd attributed to gallery business. The final pages of the report contained surveillance photos: Victoria entering a nondescript building in Brooklyn, Victoria having lunch with a man Sullivan identified as Justin Gardner, Victoria exchanging a folder with someone whose face wasn't visible in the image. Maxwell sat back, his mind racing. The narrative he'd constructed was unraveling, his perfect revenge against Rebecca, replacing her with someone younger, more beautiful, more devoted, had backfired spectacularly. Victoria was not the admiring, grateful partner he'd believed her to be. She was something else entirely. That evening, Maxwell returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. Victoria was there, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample table settings. "You're home early," she said, rising to greet him with a practiced smile. "I've been finalizing the seating chart. The Vandermeers can't be near the Coopers, of course. After that nasty lawsuit, who are you really, Victoria?" Maxwell interrupted, his voice deadly calm. Her smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean, darling?" "I know about the apartment on Central Park South. I know about your continued relationship with Justin Gardner. I know your father sells insurance. In Scranton." Victoria's expression shifted, the mask of perfect fiancée falling away to reveal something harder, more calculating. "You've been investigating me." "Answer the question," Maxwell demanded. Victoria straightened, abandoning the pretense entirely. "I'm exactly who you wanted me to be, Max. Young, beautiful, impressed by your wealth and power, the perfect trophy. To show the world and Rebecca that you'd moved on to something better." The direct mention of Rebecca shocked him. Victoria had always carefully avoided the subject of his ex-wife. "This was never about me, was it?" Victoria continued. New confidence in her voice. "It was always about her, about proving something. How you've been lying to me from the beginning," Maxwell said, ignoring her accusation. Victoria laughed, a harsh sound unlike her usual melodious titter. "We've been lying to each other, Max. You pretended to love me, and I pretended to believe it, a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Who are you working for?" Maxwell demanded, his suspicion growing. "Gardner?" Victoria gathered her purse, suddenly businesslike. "You should be asking yourself a different question, Max. Not who I'm working for, but what I've already done." The words hung in the air between them, ominous and laden with threat. For the first time in decades, Maxwell Pierce felt something uncomfortably close to fear. The morning after his confrontation with Victoria, Maxwell arrived at his office to find James Donovan waiting, his usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. "What now?" Maxwell demanded, striding past him into the private suite. Donovan followed, tablet in hand. "There's been a development. The SEC has launched an informal inquiry into Pierce Holdings' accounting practices. It's not public yet, but I have contacts who—" "What?" Maxwell interrupted sharply. "On what grounds?" "They're being vague. Something about accounting irregularities in the Chicago development." Donovan hesitated. "The timing is concerning." Maxwell's mind raced to Victoria's parting words the night before. "What I've already done." The implication suddenly crystallized with terrible clarity. "Get Sullivan up here," he ordered, "and call Burton in legal, immediately." Within the hour, Maxwell's office had transformed into a crisis center. Edward Burton, his chief legal counsel, reviewed documents while Sullivan secured Maxwell's digital systems and began tracing Victoria's activities over the past months. "She had access to my home office," Maxwell said grimly. "Unlimited time alone in the penthouse, and I never changed the security codes after Rebecca left." Sullivan nodded, his expression grim. "We're checking everything, sir. But if she's been planning this for months—" "She has," Maxwell said with certainty. "The question is why and who she's working with." By mid-afternoon, the situation had deteriorated further. Sullivan discovered that Victoria had copied numerous confidential files, financial records, contracts, emails from Maxwell's private server. More alarmingly, some of those documents had been altered before being returned to the system, with small but significant changes to dates, amounts, and signatures. "This is sophisticated work," Sullivan observed. "She wasn't acting alone. This required professional expertise." Burton looked up from his legal pad, If these altered documents were provided to the SEC, we have a serious problem. Some of these changes make legitimate transactions appear fraudulent. Maxwell paced. The length of his office, fury and disbelief warring within him. "Find her," he ordered Sullivan. "I want to know where she is, who she's with, what she's planning next." But Victoria had vanished. Her apartment, maintained for appearance's sake even though she'd practically moved into Maxwell's penthouse, was empty, her clothes gone, her personal items removed. Her gallery claimed she had taken an indefinite leave of absence 2 weeks earlier. Her phone went straight to voicemail. As the day progressed, the situation spiraled further out of control. The SEC inquiry, initially informal and confidential, became public knowledge when a financial news site published an article detailing specific allegations against Pierce Holdings. The stock price immediately dropped 15%. "How did they get this information?" Maxwell demanded, slamming the report onto his desk. "The specifics mentioned here are internal matters that weren't part of the SEC's initial questions." "Someone leaked it," Burton said grimly. "Someone with detailed knowledge of our operations and the investigation." By evening, Maxwell's world was crumbling around him. Major investors were calling, demanding explanations. Business partners were distancing themselves, issuing carefully worded statements about awaiting the results of the inquiry. The wedding venue called to confirm they were keeping Maxwell's substantial deposit, despite the apparent cancellation. Alone in his office after midnight, Maxwell poured himself a scotch and tried to make sense of the devastation. Victoria had betrayed him. That much was clear. But why? And why target his business empire rather than simply taking whatever money she could and disappearing? The answer came the next morning, in the form of a Wall Street Journal exclusive. Pierce Holdings investigation expands. Connections to Gardner Enterprises revealed. The article detailed how documents provided by anonymous sources suggested Maxwell had deliberately sabotaged a Gardner Enterprises project 3 years earlier through fraudulent means. Coincidentally, the same bitter rivalry he'd mentioned to Victoria during their early courtship. She was Gardner's plant from the beginning, Maxwell realized, cold fury replacing his shock. The entire relationship was orchestrated. Sullivan nodded grimly. "It appears so. We've confirmed she had connections to the Gardner family going back at least 5 years. The timing of your meeting at Sotheby's wasn't coincidental. She was placed there deliberately, knowing you would attend." The revelation felt like a physical blow. Maxwell had been outplayed at his own game, the precise, calculated manipulation of people and circumstances that had been his hallmark for decades. As the week progressed, the carefully constructed empire began to crack further. The board called an emergency meeting. Investors pulled out of crucial deals, and the Chicago development, the crown jewel of Pierce Holdings' expansion plans, was put on indefinite hold pending the outcome of the SEC investigation. "We need to get ahead of this," Burton advised during a tense strategy session. "Full cooperation with the investigation, public statements emphasizing your commitment to transparency, perhaps even a temporary step back from day-to-day operations." "Step back," Maxwell repeated incredulously. "I built this company. I am this company." "Right now that's the problem," Burton replied bluntly. "The market is reacting to you personally, not just to the allegations. Your recent personal situation hasn't helped matters." Maxwell knew Burton was right. The public narrative had shifted dramatically. From the powerful businessman embracing a new chapter with a beautiful young fiancée to a scorned older man whose judgment in both business and personal matters was now suspect. The final blow came the following morning. Maxwell arrived at the office to find Eliza waiting with an expression he'd never seen before, a mixture of dread and resignation. "What now?" he asked wearily. "The New York Times is running a feature tomorrow," she said, handing him a printout. Their reporter reached out for comment. The headline made his blood freeze. "Behind the fall of Maxwell Pierce, the woman who orchestrated it all." But it wasn't Victoria's name in the subheading. It was Rebecca's. Maxwell sank into his chair, scanning the article with growing horror. According to sources close to the situation, Rebecca Stewart had been working behind the scenes for months, strategically dismantling the empire her ex-husband had built. Victoria Hayes wasn't merely Gardner's plant. She was part of a more elaborate scheme, one that Rebecca had meticulously planned since before she even filed for divorce. "This can't be true," Maxwell muttered, though a cold certainty was already forming in his gut. "Rebecca isn't capable of this level of calculation." Sullivan cleared his throat. "Actually, sir, we've been looking into Mrs. Stewart's activities since the SEC investigation began. She's been remarkably busy for someone supposedly living quietly in Connecticut." The security chief laid out a series of photos and documents. Rebecca at lunch with Charles Gardner 6 months ago. Rebecca meeting discreetly with several board members of Pierce Holdings. Rebecca's name appearing on incorporation documents for a new investment group that had quietly acquired shares in Pierce Holdings through various shell companies. "She's been planning this for over a year," Sullivan concluded, "well before she left you." The realization hit Maxwell like a physical blow. While he'd been focused on hurting Rebecca through his relationship with Victoria, Rebecca had been methodically orchestrating his downfall, the woman he'd dismissed as merely decorative, whose intelligence he'd consistently underestimated, had outmaneuvered him at every turn. "Get me a meeting with her," Maxwell demanded. "Immediately." Sullivan looked uncomfortable. "That may be difficult. She's currently in London, meeting with investors who are considering acquiring Pierce's European properties at a significant discount, given the current circumstances." Maxwell stared out at the Manhattan skyline, the empire he'd built now slipping through his fingers. The irony was unbearable. He'd spent months trying to hurt Rebecca by flaunting his relationship with Victoria, and all along Rebecca had been the puppet master, using Victoria as just one part of her elaborate revenge. By the end of the week, the board had voted to place Maxwell on administrative leave pending the outcome of the SEC investigation. The stock had plummeted to half its former value. Major projects were suspended or cancelled outright. The financial press, which had once celebrated Maxwell's business acumen, now scrutinized every deal, every decision, every relationship in his past, searching for further signs of misconduct or poor judgment. In the penthouse that evening, Maxwell sat alone in the darkness, a glass of scotch untouched beside him. The silence was oppressive after weeks of constant crisis management and emergency meetings. His phone had finally stopped ringing. There was nothing left to say. No. Fires left to fight. The damage was done. A soft chime announced an incoming email on his personal account, one of the few lines of communication still open to him. The sender's name made his heart skip. Rebecca Stewart. The message contained no text, only an attachment, a photo taken earlier that day showing Rebecca in London, standing on the terrace of the Shard, with the city spread out below her. She was smiling, not in triumph, but with a serene confidence he had never truly appreciated during their years together. Behind her stood a distinguished silver-haired man whom Maxwell recognized immediately. Thomas Whitfield, his former mentor, and the man who had given Maxwell his first significant opportunity in real estate 3 decades ago. The implication was clear without words. While Maxwell's empire crumbled, Rebecca was building new alliances, new opportunities, not just destroying what he had built, but creating something new from its ashes. Maxwell closed the email and poured another scotch. The realization that had been building for days finally crystallized with painful clarity. He had never really known his wife at all. The quiet, accommodating woman who had stood in his shadow for 15 years had been watching, learning, understanding the intricate machinery of his business and his life. And when the time came, she had dismantled it all with surgical precision. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Maxwell glanced at the caller ID, Edward Burton. More bad news, undoubtedly. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the phone chimed with a text message, "Turn on CNBC, now." Maxwell reached for the remote with a sense of dread. The business news channel was running a breaking story, complete with scrolling banners, and a grim-faced anchor. In a stunning development in the Pierce Holdings scandal, former Pierce executive Jason Tanner has agreed to cooperate with federal investigators, potentially implicating CEO Maxwell Pierce in multiple instances of securities fraud, tax evasion, and intimidation of competitors. Tanner, who served as Pierce's chief financial officer from 2015 to 2021, claims to have documentation supporting these allegations. Maxwell stared at the screen in disbelief. Jason Tanner had been his right-hand man, privy to all of Maxwell's business methods, both legitimate and otherwise. If Tanner was turning on him... The phone rang again. Burton. This time, Maxwell answered. "How bad?" he asked without preamble. Burton's voice was grave. "Criminal charges, Max. The SEC investigation was just the beginning. This is now a federal case." "Tanner was as involved as I was in everything," Maxwell protested. "He can't implicate me without implicating himself." "He's cut a deal," Burton replied flatly. "Immunity in exchange for his testimony, and he has documents, Maxwell, documents that Victoria apparently helped him secure and authenticate." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Victoria hadn't just been gathering information for Gardner, she'd been building a case for federal prosecutors, working with Rebecca to ensure Maxwell's complete destruction. "What's my exposure?" Maxwell asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Burton hesitated. "Substantial. If even half of what Tanner claims is true, we're talking potential prison time, Max." The words hung in the air, unthinkable yet undeniable. Maxwell Pierce, who had built his life on the certainty of his own invulnerability, who had treated people as pieces on a chessboard, was now himself a piece being moved by others. "I need to speak with Rebecca," Maxwell said finally. "She's behind this, all of it." "That would be inadvisable," Burton cautioned. "Any contact could be construed as witness intimidation at this point." "Witness?" "Rebecca wasn't involved in my business decisions. According to Tanner's statement, she was aware of certain irregularities. She's considered a potential witness." Maxwell ended the call and poured another drink, his hand shaking slightly. The perfect life he had constructed was collapsing around him, and at the center of the destruction stood the woman he had underestimated for 15 years. Rebecca hadn't just left him. She had orchestrated his complete annihilation using the very weapons he had taught her, through years of dismissal and disregard. She had watched how he manipulated people, how he leveraged relationships for gain, how he eliminated obstacles to his ambition, and in the end, she had turned his own methods against him with devastating precision. As midnight approached, Maxwell's phone chimed once more, another email from Rebecca. This time there was a brief message accompanying the attachment. "You never really saw me, Max. Now everyone will." The attachment was a press release announcing Rebecca Stewart as the new strategic advisor for Whitfield Global Investments, focusing on ethical development and community-centered real estate projects, the exact opposite of Maxwell's aggressive, profit-focused approach that had made him both wealthy and feared. In that moment, staring at the evidence of Rebecca's new life rising from the ashes of his own, Maxwell Pierce finally understood the true nature of his failure. It wasn't just the business empire crumbling around him or the legal jeopardy he now faced. It was his fundamental misjudgment of the woman who had stood beside him for 15 years, the woman he had treated as an accessory rather than an equal. Rebecca hadn't just escaped his control, she had transcended it entirely, becoming something more powerful than he had ever recognized was possible. And in doing so, she had revealed the fundamental emptiness at the core of everything Maxwell had built. 6 months after the day Maxwell Pierce's empire began to crumble, he sat alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, far from the gleaming Manhattan penthouse he had once called home. The view outside his window was of brick walls and fire escapes rather than the sweeping panorama of Central Park. The furniture was rented, the artwork mass-produced prints rather than original masterpieces. This wasn't rock bottom, not quite, but it was a reality Maxwell had never imagined possible for himself. The television droned quietly in the background, a financial news channel reporting on the latest developments in what the media had dubbed the Pierce collapse. The commentators spoke with the casual cruelty of those discussing a fallen titan. Pierce Holdings' assets continue to be sold off piecemeal in what analysts are calling a controlled demolition of the once mighty real estate empire. The Chicago development, once the crown jewel of Maxwell Pierce's expansion plans, has been acquired by Whitfield Global Investments for 60 cents on the dollar. Maxwell turned off the TV with a sharp click. Every mention of Whitfield Global, Rebecca's new professional home, was a reminder of his spectacular miscalculation. The irony was almost unbearable. While his empire was being dismantled piece by piece, Rebecca was helping to rebuild parts of it under a new banner, with new values, new principles. His phone rang, an increasingly rare occurrence these days. The caller ID showed Edward Burton, one of the few people from his former life who still maintained contact. "How did the meeting go?" Maxwell asked without preamble. Burton's sigh spoke volumes. "Not well. The prosecutors aren't interested in a plea deal, Max. They believe they have an airtight case with Tanner's testimony and the documentation Victoria provided." "What's their offer?" 10 years, minimum security, but still." Burton paused. "It's not just the criminal charges, Max. The civil litigation is mounting. Former investors, partners claiming they were defrauded, even employees with stock options. If you fight this and lose, you could be facing substantially more time." Maxwell stared out the window at the gray Brooklyn sky. 10 years, a decade of his life spent in a prison cell, however comfortable the facility might be. At 68, if he served the full sentence, he would emerge an old man with nothing left. "What about Rebecca?" he asked, the question that had consumed him for months. "Is she cooperating with the prosecution?" "No," Burton replied. "That's the one piece of good news, if you can call it that. She's declined to make any official statement beyond what's already in the divorce records. She's not actively participating in your prosecution, Max." The news should have provided some comfort, but it only deepened Maxwell's confusion. After orchestrating his downfall with such meticulous precision, why would Rebecca step back now, when she could deliver the final blow? "I need to see her," Maxwell said suddenly. "Max, we've discussed this. Any contact could be—" "Not officially, not as part of any legal proceeding. I just need to understand why. Not just why she left, but why like this. Why everything." Burton was silent for a moment. "I can't advise that, professionally speaking, but personally I understand. Just be careful. Anything you say could potentially be used against you." After ending the call, Maxwell spent the afternoon drafting and redrafting a message to Rebecca. What could he possibly say to the woman who had dismantled the life he had built? What words could encompass the complex tangle of rage, respect, and bewilderment he felt toward her now? Finally, he settled on simplicity. "I would like to meet. One conversation, and then I'll never contact you again. Name the place and time." He sent the email before he could reconsider, then waited, staring at his inbox with an intensity that surprised him. Hours passed with no response. Maxwell eventually fell into a restless sleep on the couch, his dreams filled with crumbling towers and shadowy figures. Morning brought an unexpected reply. "Tomorrow, the Connecticut house, 2 p.m. The house in Connecticut, once their weekend retreat from Manhattan's frenetic energy, the place where Rebecca had relocated after the divorce. Maxwell hadn't been there since she left him, couldn't imagine what changes she might have made to the space they once shared. The next day, Maxwell drove himself to Connecticut in a modest rental car, another symbol of his diminished circumstances. The familiar route brought back memories of weekend escapes, of rare moments when business receded, and something almost like contentment had occasionally emerged between them. The house looked different as he approached, warmer somehow, with flower gardens where there had once been manicured lawns, colorful cushions visible through the windows instead of the austere furnishings he remembered. This was Rebecca's home now, transformed by her preferences rather than his insistence on a certain aesthetic. She opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for his arrival. At 47, Rebecca looked not younger, but more alive than she had during their marriage, her honey blonde hair looser around her shoulders, her clothing relaxed yet elegant, her eyes clear and direct as they met his. "Maxwell," she said, her voice neither warm nor cold, simply acknowledging his presence. "Rebecca," he replied, suddenly uncertain. The speech he had mentally prepared seemed inadequate in the face of her composed reality. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter a home that felt both familiar and foreign. The architecture was the same, but everything else had changed, warmer. Colors, personal touches, books and magazines scattered casually on surfaces that had once been rigidly minimalist under his direction. "Would you like coffee?" she asked, leading him to a sunlit kitchen that had been completely renovated, rustic and welcoming where it had once been sleek and impersonal. "Please," he said, taking a seat at a farmhouse table that had replaced the glass and chrome piece he'd selected years ago. Rebecca moved with easy confidence, preparing 2 cups of coffee in silence. Maxwell studied her, trying to reconcile this self-assured woman with the quiet, accommodating wife he thought he had known. "Why?" he asked finally, the single word encompassing everything he had come to understand. Rebecca placed a mug before him and sat down opposite, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Why did I leave? Or why did I dismantle your empire?" "Both. Everything. I understand being unhappy, wanting out of the marriage. But this..." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the collapse of his business, his reputation, his entire life. Rebecca considered him for a long moment. "I didn't plan it initially. When I left, I only wanted freedom, from your control, from being invisible in my own life, from the gilded cage you'd constructed around me." She sipped her coffee, her movements deliberate. "But then I saw what you did next. How quickly you replaced me with Victoria. How publicly you flaunted her. How deliberately you constructed this narrative of upgrading to something better. It wasn't just moving on, Maxwell. It was designed to hurt me, to diminish me." Maxwell couldn't deny it. His relationship with Victoria had been calculated precisely for that effect. "So this was revenge," he said flatly. Rebecca shook her head. "Not just revenge, justice. During our marriage, I watched you destroy people who crossed you, business rivals, employees who challenged you, anyone who threatened your control or your image of yourself. You didn't just defeat them. You obliterated them, took everything, left them with nothing." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes held a steely resolve he had never truly noticed before. "When you turned that same machinery against me, trying to replace me with a younger, more compliant version, trying to show the world how dispensable I was, I realized you would never stop. Your ego wouldn't allow it. You needed to win, to dominate, to control the narrative. So you did exactly what you're accusing me of," Maxwell argued. "You didn't just divorce me, you systematically destroyed everything I built." "No," Rebecca corrected him gently. "I revealed what you had actually built, the fraud, the manipulation, the intimidation tactics. I didn't create those things, Maxwell. You did. I just made sure they came to light." The simple truth of her words struck him. With unexpected force, every allegation, every scandal, every revelation that had contributed to his downfall was rooted in his own actions, his own decisions over decades. "How did you do it?" he asked, professional curiosity breaking through his resentment. "Victoria, the Gardner connection, Tanner's testimony, it was also coordinated." A small smile touched Rebecca's lips. "For 15 years, I watched how you operated. I saw how you built alliances, leveraged relationships, identified weaknesses. I learned from the master, Maxwell. You just never noticed I was paying attention. And Victoria? A fortunate coincidence, initially. I knew of her connection, her to the Gardner family through charity work, but I didn't place her in your path. That was Charles Gardner's initiative." Rebecca set down her cup. "Once I realized what was happening, though, it fit perfectly into the larger picture. Victoria was gathering evidence for Gardner. I simply ensured that evidence found its way to the right authorities." Maxwell stared at her, seeing truly for the first time the formidable intelligence and strategic mind that had been beside him all along, qualities he had dismissed or ignored in his certainty that Rebecca was merely decorative, a social asset, rather than an equal. "Why aren't you cooperating with the prosecution?" he asked, returning to the question that had puzzled him. "You could ensure I spend the next decade in prison. Complete your victory." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, something almost like pity crossing her features. "That's the difference between us, Maxwell. I never wanted to destroy you personally, just the system of power and privilege that allowed you to operate with impunity. You're facing consequences for your actions, as you should. But I don't need to be the one delivering those consequences." She rose, moving to the large windows that overlooked gardens. She had planted herself after the divorce. "Besides, I've moved on. My work with Whitfield Global is fulfilling. We're developing projects that serve communities rather than just generating profit. The Connecticut Women's Shelter has finally secured funding. Sarah is finishing her doctorate." She turned back to him. "My life doesn't revolve around you anymore, Maxwell. It never should have." The simple dignity of her statement left him momentarily speechless. While he had been consumed with revenge, with proving his power through Victoria, with maintaining control at all costs, Rebecca had been building something meaningful, not just a new life for herself, but a positive impact on others. "So what happens now?" he asked, hating the uncertainty in his voice. "You face the consequences of your choices," Rebecca replied simply. "And perhaps if you're willing to truly reflect, you might find a different path forward. At my age, with criminal charges pending and civil lawsuits that will take whatever assets I have left?" Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "The Maxwell Pierce I knew would see that as a challenge, not a defeat. Your intelligence, your drive, those things are still there. They just need a better purpose than accumulating wealth and power." She glanced at her watch. "I have a meeting in Hartford in an hour. I should get ready." Maxwell rose, understanding that their conversation was over. At the door he paused, one final question pressing at him. "Are you happy now, Rebecca?" She considered the question seriously. "I'm fulfilled. I'm engaged with work that matters. I'm present in my daughter's life and my own." A genuine smile transformed her face. "Yes, Maxwell, I'm happy now." The simple truth of her statement hit him harder than any condemnation could have. Rebecca had won not just by orchestrating his downfall, but by creating a life of genuine meaning and satisfaction, something that, despite all his wealth and power, Maxwell had never truly achieved. "Goodbye, Maxwell," she said, not unkindly. "Goodbye, Rebecca," he replied, stepping into the sunlight of a perfect Connecticut afternoon. Driving back to New York, Maxwell felt something shift within him. Not forgiveness, exactly, nor acceptance of his circumstances, but a glimmer of something close to clarity. For decades, he had defined success through accumulation: money, property, power, even people. Rebecca had shown him a different model, one based on connection, purpose, contribution. Back in his Brooklyn apartment, Maxwell turned on the television, out of habit, only to see his own face on the screen, an old photo from better days accompanying yet another analysis of his downfall. He reached for the remote to turn it off, then hesitated, listening to the anchor's words. Speculation about a potential plea deal in the Pierce case. Sources close to the investigation suggest that prosecutors might consider reduced charges in exchange for Pierce's cooperation regarding other financial irregularities in the real estate industry. Maxwell turned off the TV and opened his laptop. After a moment's consideration, he composed an email to Edward Burton. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of cooperation with the authorities, not to reduce my own charges, but because there are things that should come to light, systems that should change. Let me know when we can talk." As he sent the email, Maxwell realized that for the first time in months, perhaps years, he felt something close to peace. Not because his circumstances had improved, but because he had glimpsed a different way forward. Not redemption, perhaps, but purpose. Not control, but contribution. The empire he had built was gone, dismantled by the woman he had underestimated for 15 years, but in its place, Something new might yet emerge, not another monument to wealth and power, but perhaps something more lasting, more meaningful. Maxwell. Pierce, who had spent decades believing that money was the ultimate shield, had lost everything. And in that loss, he had found the first glimmer of what might eventually become wisdom. Outside his window, Brooklyn continued its daily rhythm. People connecting, working, living in a complex web of relationships he had never truly valued. For the first time, Maxwell looked at this ordinary scene not with contempt for its modesty, but with curiosity about its authenticity. His phone rang, Burton responding to his email with surprising speed. As Maxwell answered, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Not the cold calculation of a strategic move, but the quiet certainty of a right choice. The man who had built an empire on control was taking his first step into a world where true strength might lie in its surrender. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope you were captivated by Maxwell and Rebecca's journey through power, betrayal, and redemption. For more engaging stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the true meaning of success, we've created a special playlist just for you. Click the link to your left to discover it. If this tale of transformation resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you thought-provoking narratives that challenge our perspectives on life, love, and what truly matters. Don't miss our upcoming content. We have so many more powerful stories to share. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below.